Joe Biden's foreign policy is just a complete and utter cluster. There's this amazing situation that is currently happening. Joe Biden is now visiting Saudi Arabia. So you'll recall that Joe Biden has spent the last couple of years ostracizing Saudi Arabia to the benefit of Iran. He's been reaching out to Iran, which is an intransigent, evil terror state that has attempted to foster terrorism everywhere in the region, has fostered terrorism in Syria, has fostered terrorism in Lebanon, has fostered terrorism in the Gaza Strip, has fostered terrorism in Yemen. And Joe Biden has been reaching out to those people who are also seeking to develop nuclear weapons. At the same time, he has been cracking down on the Saudis. Now, listen, the Saudis are I would say, an unreliable ally of the United States. They also happen to be the world's largest pumpers of gas and oil. So you're alienating the people you need to pump the gas in favor of a terror regime that opposes all of America's interests. And you're doing so because of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, who is a quasi-journalist. I say quasi because he was basically in a semi-contributor to the Washington Post who was very much in favor of the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. Saudi Arabia murdered him. That does not make Saudi Arabia good. It is also true that Saudi Arabia versus Iran on the which is a greater human rights violator scale, Iran wildly outclasses Saudi Arabia. And yet we are reaching out to Iran and we are alienating Saudi Arabia. And this is part of Joe Biden's broader attempt to transition away from oil and natural gas. Well, the iceberg of reality has now been hit. And that iceberg of reality is that it turns out that the single most efficient form of energy on planet Earth is still carbon-based fossil fuels. And that means that when the gas prices spike, guess who's going to have to go begging hat in hand? Joe Biden's idiotic foreign policy with regard to oil, gas in the Middle East led him to try to reintroduce relations with Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela in the perverse hope that suddenly Venezuela would start pumping gas, despite the fact they've been generally unable to pump large quantities of gas for probably a decade and a half because the government nationalized the industry and is wildly inefficient at actually even getting the gas out of the ground. It's an amazing thing. So we've got no gas, but we have legitimized Maduro. Meanwhile, we've delegitimized Saudi Arabia and gotten no gas. That was Joe Biden's idiot plan. Exacerbated, of course, by the war in Ukraine, which cut off gas supplies from Russia. So you can thank Joe Biden for the gas price spike, even on a foreign policy level. Even when Joe Biden says that it's Russia and Putin and the invasion of Ukraine that has spiked your gas prices, that is only partially true. We could have compensated for the spiking gas prices by going to people like Saudi Arabia if Joe Biden had not spent the last several years alienating Saudi Arabia and talking about how the Saudis are the world's worst human rights violators and we have to cut off relations with them and how dare they do what they are doing in Yemen and why don't we make nice with the Iranians. And so now Joe Biden has to go hat in hand to Saudi Arabia because it turns out people don't like high gas prices and they want their gas prices lowered. So according to the Wall Street Journal, apparently Saudis are going to boost their oil production in advance of Joe Biden arriving in Saudi Arabia. Quote, Saudi Arabia took steps on Thursday to boost oil production and extend a truce with Iran-backed forces in Yemen, two significant moves that help pave the way for President Biden to visit the kingdom later this month as the two countries try to reset their strained relationship. Saudi-led OPEC and its allies agreed to a bigger-than-expected oil production increase, allowing Riyadh to potentially pump more crude. At the same time, Saudi Arabia agreed to extend a 2-month-old ceasefire with Iran-backed Houthi fighters in Yemen, where the kingdom has been entangled in a costly and unpopular 7-year-old war. Well, they were totally fine with extending a ceasefire so long as the Houthis extend the ceasefire. By the way, it is worth noting that Saudi Arabia is a much more moderate regime than it was even 10 or 15 years ago. Mohammed bin Salman, the new leader, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, yes, he is a brutal person who had Jamal Khashoggi killed. Also, he is modernizing Saudi Arabia's entire investment infrastructure and attempting to make peace with Israel. You know, the United States has been, in any sort of real politics scenario, you have to acknowledge that major world powers are going to have to make common cause with people who happen to be dictators, so long as those people happen to share many of our interests. And if you're stacking up Saudi Arabia's interests with Iran's interests right now, Saudi Arabia shares many more of our interests than Iran does. So Joe Biden is now having to go back and basically make nice with the Saudis to the consternation of the far left. According to the Wall Street Journal, both moves were sought by the United States and helped set the stage for Biden to visit Saudi Arabia later this month, as the president looks to set aside long-standing divisions with the kingdom amid high oil and gasoline prices that have driven inflation. While the visit hasn't officially been announced, Thursday's moves create momentum for the president's trip. In other words, Joe Biden went to the Saudis and he said, we need you to pump more oil and also give us like some sort of face-saving solution with regard to the Houthis for a couple of weeks so that you can pump more oil and I don't look like a complete dullard. But here's the thing, Joe Biden does look like a dullard because you have been paying higher gas prices for the last year and a half because Joe Biden decided to alienate the top pumpers of oil on planet Earth via OPEC. That is Joe Biden's fault. And he did so despite the fact that Saudi Arabia, again, has been moderating and attempting to make peace with Israel. Covertly and in many ways, rather overtly. Joe Biden alienated an actual burgeoning, strengthening American ally in the Middle East in favor of the Iranians. And also because Joe Biden has a perverse notion of environmentalism because he's run by his hard left. And it turns out that that policy is garbage. Jennifer Granholm, our energy secretary yesterday, for example, she was rambling about the clean green energy economy.
We're going to do this. We're going to get to this clean energy economy. One hydroelectric project, one solar panel, one wind turbine, one geothermal project, one advanced nuclear reactor, one electric vehicle, one battery at a time. And that is all part of the silver buckshot to get to that 100% clean future.
You're not getting there. You're not getting there, not with the technologies we currently have in place. It ain't going to happen. Realistically speaking, the forms of energy she's talking about are not nearly as efficient as carbon-based fossil fuel. Every single human who knows anything about basic chemistry knows this. It does not matter. Joe Biden is run by his hard left. And by a hard left, by the way, that is so hard left. I mean, the environmentalist hard left is just, I'm sorry, they're out of their minds. In the undercovered story of the week, it's been on my schedule for literally a week at this point. I just didn't have a chance to get to it. NPR reported that a man in a wig was detained after throwing a piece of cake at the Mona Lisa. Quote, a man who seems to have been disguised as an old woman in a wheelchair threw a piece of cake at the Mona Lisa in Paris. Video posted on social media shows security guards at the Louvre escorting the man away Sunday as he spoke in French about the planet. Think of the earth. Think there are people who are destroying the earth. Think about it. Artists tell you, think of the earth. That's why I did this, he says, according to the Associated Press. Another video showed someone clearing the cake off the glass, protecting the Mona Lisa, as onlookers held up their phones to film the incident's aftermath. The 36-year-old man was detained and sent to a psychiatric unit. And the basic notion here is somehow throwing cake at the monuments of Western civilization like the Mona Lisa, that this is going to convince people that they ought to lower their carbon emissions and embrace clean energy. Fortunately, we have idiots like Sunny Hostin on The View to explain why this is actually a good thing.
I think those kinds of stunts, like he wore a wig and he dressed up as an elderly woman in a wheelchair to smuggle it in. We're talking about that as opposed to what the issue is that he's actually protesting. So I think that stunts like that don't work at all.
I think they work. I mean, we're talking about it.
We're not talking about climate change. We're talking about
I think climate change is something that we ignore so much, in not only in this country but around the world, and. Obviously, we're talking about this issue. The Mona Lisa is about this big. I learned when I went to the Louvre, and it also is in this case.
Yeah, it's this big, and it's somebody else's tiny art. Yeah. But how dare you try to destroy somebody else's art?
I don't think it can be destroyed because, again, it's in this bulletproof thing, and he threw some whipped cream at it.
Yeah, Sunny Hostin defending this because, of course, climate change is so important. Yeah, well, Joe Biden has that same philosophy except with regard to the American economy. Yeah, we can throw cake at the American economy. We could damage the American economy. You can pay higher gas prices at the pump. All in favor of a bizarrely utopian notion of how energy is produced, combined with the utopian notion of how foreign policy ought to be done. And it only cost you, hundreds or thousands of dollars over the course of the last couple of months to play out Joe Biden's green and foreign policy fantasies. Again, that iceberg of reality is slamming Joe Biden's Titanic. The battle for the culture is heating up. We here at The Daily Wire are making some big moves. So be sure to like, subscribe, ring that bell, because you're not going to want to miss a single moment.